I was standing at the edge of my neighbor's sprawling backyard, invisible as always, watching Landon Brooks be crowned as the success story of our little community. The summer sun beat down on the manicured lawn of Maple Glen's most prestigious address as hundreds of neighbors raised their champagne flutes to toast the Golden Boy's graduation. Every clink of crystal felt like a needle in my heart. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gregory Brooks announced, his voice carrying across the garden where I stood awkwardly in my department store dress. "Today, we celebrate not just my son's graduation, but his future. The $75 million company, the Tesla parked in our driveway, and this mansion, it's all his legacy now." Cheers erupted. I remained motionless, my fingers absently tracing the frayed edge of my purse. For years, I'd been Avery the failure to these people, the quiet girl who couldn't measure up, who wasn't worth noticing. Landon caught my eye from across the lawn and smirked, lifting his glass in my direction with mock salute. That's when it happened. A man I'd never seen before, tall, slender, in an impeccable charcoal suit, cut through the crowd with purposeful strides. People parted for him instinctively, though no one seemed to know who he was. He stopped directly in front of me, not Landon, not Gregory, but me, Avery Sinclair, the neighborhood ghost. "Ms. Sinclair," he said, voice low enough that only I could hear. He extended a thick cream-colored envelope. "I believe this belongs to you." My fingers trembled as I accepted it. The paper felt heavy, expensive. "It's time to show them who really owns this street," he whispered, then stepped back with a slight bow. The crowd had noticed now. Conversations faltered. Gregory's booming voice trailed off mid-sentence. Landon's smirk dissolved. And for the first time in my 26 years in Maple Glen, I felt something extraordinary course through my veins. Not shame, not insecurity, but power. I looked down at the envelope in my hands and knew with absolute certainty that everything was about to change. Maple Glen wasn't always a prison of judgment and whispers. When my parents moved us here 20 years ago, I was 6, gap-toothed, and blissfully unaware that neighborhoods like this one had invisible hierarchies as rigid as any royal court. Our house was modest compared to the others. A small colonial at Eichstowns, the end of Sycamore Lane with peeling white paint and a slightly crooked mailbox. My father, James Sinclair, worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm downtown. My mother, Ellen, taught 3rd grade at the local elementary school. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich either, a distinction that mattered enormously in Maple Glen. "This neighborhood will give you opportunities," my father would say, his eyes distant with hope. "Connections. A future." The Brooks family moved in next door when I was 8. Their house was twice the size of ours, with gleaming windows and a circular driveway where Gregory Brooks parked his Mercedes. His wife, Victoria, was all pearls and perfect posture. Their son, Landon, was a year older than me, with a confident smile that adults seemed to find charming. "Why don't you go introduce yourself?" my mother suggested one Saturday morning, nudging me toward the fence that separated our properties. Landon was in his backyard, tossing a baseball up and catching it with a practiced ease. I approached nervously, fingers hooked through the chain links. "Hi," I called. "I'm Avery." He looked at me, then at my house, his eyes calculating in a way no 9-year-olds should be. "My dad says your house brings down property values," he said finally. The words hit me like a slap, though I didn't understand their meaning yet. I just knew they were meant to hurt, to establish distance. I retreated, burning with shame I couldn't name. That was the beginning of a pattern that would follow me through childhood, adolescence, and into adulthood. Landon excelled at everything: sports, academics, social grace. I was quiet, bookish, more comfortable with ideas than people. While he collected trophies and accolades, I collected wounds and slights. "Did you hear Landon got early acceptance to Princeton?" Mrs. Henderson would say at the neighborhood barbecue, loud enough for me to hear as I refilled the napkin holder. "And a full-ride scholarship," Mrs. Peterson would add, "athletic and academic." Meanwhile, I worked part-time at the local library and applied to state schools. When I got accepted to the University of Illinois with a partial scholarship, my parents were proud but subdued. "That's wonderful, honey," my mother said, patting my hand. "Different paths for different people. Different paths." That became the euphemism for why I couldn't be like Landon Brooks. Different paths explained why, at neighborhood events, he was surrounded by admirers while I helped in the kitchen. Different paths justified why his father's business connections offered him internships while I worked retail during summers. My grandfather, my father's father, was my only true ally. Arthur Sinclair lived in a small town in rural Illinois and visited twice a year. He was quiet like me, observant, with hands gnarled from decades of carpentry work. "Don't let them fool you, Avery," he told me once as we sat on our front porch, watching the Brooks family host another lavish garden party. Worth isn't measured by who makes the most noise. When I was 17, Landon crashed his car, a 16th birthday gift from his parents, into our mailbox. He'd been showing off for friends, taking the corner too fast. The mailbox crumpled like paper. My father went outside to assess the damage. "James, these things happen," Gregory Brooks said, clapping my father on the shoulder. "Boys will be boys. I'll send someone to fix it." My father nodded, shoulders slightly hunched. He never mentioned how Gregory never did send anyone, and how he spent a Saturday repairing it himself. I left for college a year later, eager to escape Maple Glen's suffocating hierarchy. University was better, anonymous, meritocratic. I studied literature and business, finding my voice in writing and analysis. But breaks and summers meant returning home, to the neighborhood where my identity had been decided long ago. After graduation, I took a job at a small publishing house in the city, 30 minutes from Maple Glen. I could have moved, found an apartment downtown, or in one of the trendy neighborhoods where young professionals clustered. But my parents were getting older. My father's health was declining. Years of stress had weakened his heart. My mother needed help. So I came home, commuting each day, slipping back into the role of Avery the invisible. Landon returned from Princeton with an MBA and joined his father's company, Brooks Enterprises, a commercial real estate firm that had expanded aggressively over the years. His homecoming was celebrated with a block party. Mine wasn't marked at all. "Did you hear Landon closed that deal with Westridge Developers?" Mrs. Henderson asked at the grocery store, not really expecting an answer. From me. $75 million. The Brooks name will be on half the buildings downtown. I nodded politely and selected my apples. My grandfather passed away the winter I turned 25. The funeral was small, just family and a few old friends from his hometown. Among his possessions was a letter addressed to me, to be opened when the time is right. I kept it in my dresser drawer, unopened. Something told me to wait. My father died 6 months later, heart attack, sudden but not unexpected. The neighbors sent flowers and casseroles. Gregory Brooks made an appearance at the funeral, Landon in tow. They stayed 15 minutes. "If there's anything we can do," Gregory said, his voice carrying across the funeral home so everyone could hear his generosity. My mother moved to Florida to live with her sister. She asked if I wanted to come, but I chose to stay in the house where I'd grown up. It needed work, but it was home. And something kept me there. Some intuition that there was unfinished business in Maple Glen. I was right. The invitation to Landon's graduation party arrived on cream-colored cardstock, addressed to the Sinclair residents, rather than to me by name. It was a neighborhood event. Everyone would be there to celebrate the Golden Boy's MBA and his formal induction as vice president of Brooks Enterprises. I considered not going. What was the point? Another afternoon of standing on the periphery, watching Landon soak up adoration while neighbors whispered about my quiet life, my modest achievements. "You hear she still lives in that old house? Never married. Works at some little company downtown. Such a shame." But something pulled me toward that party. Perhaps the same instinct that had kept me in Maple Glen all these years. I selected a simple blue dress, applied minimal makeup, and walked the short distance to the Brooks mansion, steeling myself for another exercise in humility. The backyard had been transformed into a reception, worthy of a society wedding. White tents, professional catering, a string quartet playing softly near the pool. At least 200 people milled about. Neighbors I'd known my entire life mixed with business associates and friends of the Brooks family. "Avery!" Mrs. Henderson spotted me hovering near the entrance. "How nice you could make it. Help yourself to a drink." She moved on quickly, gravitating toward a group surrounding Victoria Brooks, who was resplendent in designer white, her blonde hair perfectly highlighted. I accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and found a quiet spot beneath a maple tree. From there, I could observe without participating, a skill I'd perfected over decades. "Look at him," I overheard Mrs. Peterson say to another neighbor. "Harvard, business school, and so handsome. Nothing like that Sinclair girl. Did you know she never even tried for an Ivy League school?" "Some people just don't have ambition," her companion replied. "Or talent." Their laughter cut through me, but I maintained my neutral expression. I'd learned long ago not to show when the barbs landed. Landon worked the crowd like a politician, his smile broad, his handshake firm. At 27, he had the confidence of someone who'd never questioned his place in the world. His tailored suit probably cost more than my monthly salary. Gregory Brooks climbed the steps to a small platform erected for speeches. He tapped a knife against his crystal flute, and the crowd fell silent. Friends, neighbors, colleagues, he began, voice booming with practiced authority. Today marks not just the completion of my son's education, but the beginning of a new chapter for Brooks Enterprises. Applause rippled through the gathering. Gregory basked in it before continuing. Landon has proven himself beyond my wildest expectations. His strategic vision has already expanded our portfolio by 30%. And today, I'm proud to announce that Brooks Enterprises has completed our largest acquisition to date, a $75 million development that will reshape our city's skyline. More applause, louder this time. I sipped my champagne, feeling its bubbles dissolve on my tongue. To mark this occasion, Gregory continued, I'm making it official. The company, this home, everything I've built, it all passes to Landon, including, he gestured with a flourish toward the driveway, that new Tesla Model S, because my son deserves nothing but the best. The crowd erupted in cheers. Landon stepped forward, embracing his father with practiced humility. I'm honored, he said into the microphone, and I promise to build on my father's legacy, to take Brooks Enterprises to heights even he couldn't imagine. His eyes found mine across the lawn. He raised his glass slightly, that familiar smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The gesture said everything. I've won. Again. As always. I felt something inside me wither. Not because I wanted what Landon had. I'd never craved wealth or status for their own sake. But because in that moment, surrounded by neighbors who'd watched me grow up, yet never really seen me, I felt utterly insignificant. A footnote in the story of Maple Glen. That's when the man in the charcoal suit appeared. He moved through the crowd with quiet authority, his destination unmistakable. Not Landon, not Gregory, me. Ms. Sinclair, he said softly, extending the envelope. I believe this belongs to you. The crowd noise diminished as neighbors noticed the stranger, noticed his focus on me. It's time to show them who really owns this street, he whispered. With those words, everything shifted. The weight of the envelope in my hands felt like possibility, like power. For the first time in my life, all eyes in Maple Glen were on me, not with dismissal or pity, but with curiosity and sudden unease. I opened the envelope with steady fingers. The envelope contained a stack of documents, legal papers, property deeds, financial statements, held together by a silver paperclip. On top was a letter, handwritten in my grandfather's familiar, careful script. My dearest Avery, if you're reading this, the time has come. I've always told you that patience is a virtue and yours is about to be rewarded. What you hold in your hands is the truth of Maple Glen. 50 years ago, before the mansions and manicured lawns, this land belonged to my father, your great-grandfather, Harold Sinclair. He parceled and sold most of it to developers, but maintained ownership of key properties through a holding company, Sinclair Holdings. Your father never wanted this responsibility. He chose a simpler life, and I respected his decision. But you, Avery, have the strength your father lacked, the wisdom to use, power justly. Upon my death, all assets of Sinclair Holdings transferred to you. This includes ownership of the land beneath 8 properties in Maple Glen, including the Brooks residence, for which they've been paying ground lease fees to a corporate entity they never bothered to investigate. Show them who you truly are, not who they decided you were. With love and faith, grandfather, I looked up. From the letter, my hands trembling slightly. The lawyer, for that's who he clearly was, gave me an encouraging nod. I'm Walter Harlan, he said quietly. I was your grandfather's attorney for 40 years. These documents confirm your ownership of significant portions of Maple Glen, including the land beneath the Brooks property. They've been tenants, essentially. Very wealthy tenants, but tenants nonetheless. The murmurs around us grew louder. Gregory Brooks pushed through the crowd, Landon close behind. Their expressions a mix of confusion and emerging alarm. What's going on here? Gregory demanded, his voice lacking its usual authority. Walter Harlan turned, professional and composed. Mr. Brooks, I'm Walter Harlan, representing Ms. Sinclair. I've just delivered documents confirming her inheritance as the principal of Sinclair Holdings. Gregory's face flushed. Sinclair Holdings? I don't understand. It's the company that owns the land beneath your home, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. And beneath Brooks Enterprises headquarters downtown, my great-grandfather established it, my grandfather maintained it, And now it's mine. The color drained from Gregory's face. Landon stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. That's impossible, Landon sputtered. We own this property. We have for decades. Walter Harlan smiled thinly. You own the structures, Mr. Brooks, but the land, the actual earth beneath your feet, has always belonged to the Sinclairs. Your family has been paying ground lease fees through a corporate subsidiary. Quite substantial fees, actually, which have funded a very impressive investment portfolio for Ms. Sinclair. The silence that fell over the party was absolute. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. Hundreds of eyes fixed on me, not with pity or dismissal, but with shock and a dawning respect tinged with fear. I should have felt triumphant. This was a moment of vindication after years of being overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. Yet what I felt was more complex. A quiet strength, yes, but also a strange compassion for the Brooks family, whose certainties were crumbling before my eyes. Why didn't you say anything before? Mrs. Henderson asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. I met her gaze steadily. I didn't know. My grandfather believed I needed to find my own way first, to become strong enough to handle this responsibility. Gregory Brooks had recovered some of his composure. This changes nothing about today's announcement. Brooks Enterprises still... Actually, Walter Harlan interrupted gently, it changes quite a lot. The ground lease for Brooks Enterprises headquarters comes up for renewal next month. Ms. Sinclair has several options regarding those terms. Landon stepped forward, his perfect facade cracking. You can't do this. You're nobody. Just the quiet girl next door who never amounted to anything. His words hung in the air, revealing the cruelty that had always lurked beneath his charm. In that moment, every neighbor present remembered a similar slight, a dismissive comment, an unkindness from the Brooks family that had been excused because of their wealth and position. I'm not nobody, Landon, I said softly. I'm the owner of Maple Glen. I always was. You just never bothered to see me. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Allegiances that had seemed fixed for decades suddenly seemed less certain. Victoria Brooks appeared at her husband's side, her perfect composure slipping. Gregory, what does this mean? Will we lose the house? Before he could answer, I stepped forward. No one's losing anything today. This isn't about revenge, it's about recognition, about truth. I turned to address the crowd, these neighbors who'd watched me grow up yet never truly seen me. I'd like to finish my champagne and enjoy this lovely party, I said, my voice carrying across the sudden stillness. We can discuss business details another time. After all, we're neighbors. We should celebrate together. With that simple statement, I reclaimed my place in Maple Glen, not as Avery the Invisible, but as Avery Sinclair, a woman of substance and character. The crowd parted as Walter Harlan and I moved toward the refreshment table, whispers following in our wake. Gregory and Landon stood frozen, their triumph transformed into uncertainty in the space of minutes. The power dynamic of Maple Glen had shifted irreversibly, and everyone present knew it. As I sipped my champagne, Mrs. Peterson approached hesitantly. Avery, we never realized. It's all right, I said gently. Neither did I, until today. And somehow, that was the truth. This revelation wasn't just about property and wealth. It was about discovering my own worth, separate from what others had decided it should be. My grandfather's final gift wasn't just the inheritance. It was this moment of clarity. The party continued in a subdued fashion. Conversations hushed, glances directed my way filled with new curiosity and respect. I remained for another hour, speaking politely with neighbors who'd previously overlooked me, accepting belated congratulations on my success. When I finally left, Walter Harlan walked me to the edge of the property. Your grandfather would be proud, he said. He always said you had more strength than anyone gave you credit for. I looked back at the Brooks mansion, at Landon standing alone by the pool, his expression lost. What happens now? I asked. Walter smiled. That, Ms. Sinclair, is entirely up to you. The days following the Brooks party transformed my life in Maple Glen. Neighbors who had previously looked through me now stopped to chat when I collected my mail. Mrs. Henderson brought over a homemade pie to welcome you properly to the neighborhood, as if I hadn't lived there my entire life. Mr. Peterson offered to help with yard work, something he'd never considered during the 20 years I'd struggled to maintain the property alone. I accepted their gestures with grace, neither encouraging their sudden attention nor rejecting it. Their motivations might have been self-serving, a desire to align themselves with the neighborhood's newly discovered power center. But beneath that was something more profound, A recognition that they had misjudged me, misjudged my family, for decades. Walter Harlan became a regular visitor, helping me navigate the complex portfolio I'd inherited. Beyond the Maple Glen properties, my grandfather had built an impressive investment empire: commercial real estate across 3 states, stock holdings, even a small publishing company similar to where I worked. "You don't need to keep your job," Walter pointed out during one of our meetings at my kitchen table. "Your annual income from the portfolio exceeds your salary by a factor of 30. I stirred my tea thoughtfully. "I like my job. I'm good at it. That hasn't changed." Walter smiled. "Your grandfather said you'd say that. He admired your work ethic." 1 week after the party, Gregory Brooks requested a meeting. We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, away from the watchful eyes of Maple Glen. He arrived precisely on time, looking less commanding in the bright light of the cafe than he had in his backyard. The circles under his eyes suggested sleepless nights. "Thank you for meeting me," he said, folding his large frame into the chair across from mine. "I'll get straight to the point. What are your intentions regarding the ground lease?" I sipped my coffee. "Fair market value, Mr. Brooks. Nothing more, nothing less." He exhaled slowly. "And the terms? Will you renew for the standard 20-year period?" "That depends," I said carefully, "on several factors." Such as? "Such as how Brooks Enterprises conducts itself moving forward, how it treats its employees, its ethics, its contribution to the community." Gregory's expression hardened. "You're in no position to dictate how I run my company." "I'm not dictating," I corrected gently. "I'm expressing my values as a landlord. You're free to align with them or not. If not, you'll have a year to relocate Brooks Enterprises headquarters, per the terms of your current lease." He stared at me, reassessing. "You've changed." "No," I replied. "I've always been this person. You just never bothered to see me." We negotiated. For an hour. Gregory was a skilled businessman, but he was operating from a position of weakness for perhaps the first time in his career. We eventually reached terms we could both accept: a fair lease renewal with provisions regarding ethical business practices and community involvement. As we prepared to leave, he hesitated. "What about the house? Our home?" "Your home is secure," I assured him. "I have no interest in disrupting families, including yours." Relief flickered across his face, followed by something more complex, perhaps the beginning of respect. Landon was another matter entirely. 3 days after my meeting with his father, he appeared on my doorstep unannounced, his Tesla parked conspicuously in my modest driveway. "We need to talk," he said when I opened the door. I stepped aside to let him enter. The contrast between his tailored appearance and my simple living room was stark, but for once I felt no inferiority. "Nice place," he said, the insincerity evident. "Very cozy. What can I do for you, Landon?" He paced my small living room. "This inheritance? It's changed you. Gone to your head." I smiled slightly. "It hasn't changed me at all. It's changed how people see me, which isn't the same thing." "Look," he said, abruptly shifting tactics. "We grew up together. We have history. There's no reason we can't work together on this. Perhaps a partnership." "A partnership," I repeated, the word flat. "Yes. Brooks Sinclair Enterprises has a nice ring to it, don't you think? We could combine our assets, our vision. It would be beneficial for both of us." I studied him carefully. "Is that what this visit is about? A business proposition?" He stepped closer. "It could be more. We've known each other forever, Avery. Maybe we just needed to see each other as equals to recognize the possibilities." The suggestion hung in the air between us, transparent in its calculation. Landon wasn't offering partnership or romance. He was offering a way to regain control of what he'd lost, to subsume my inheritance into the Brooks empire through marriage or merger. "No," I said simply. He blinked. "No to which part?" "All of it. I'm not interested in a business partnership with Brooks Enterprises, and I'm certainly not interested in anything personal with you." His charm evaporated. "You're making a mistake. Do you really think you can manage this? Inheritance alone? You're an editor at a small publishing house, not a business mogul." "I'm a quick learner," I replied, "and I have excellent advisors." He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "You'll regret this. Nobody rejects a Brooks." After he left, I sat in my quiet living room, processing the interaction. There had been a time when Landon's dismissal would have wounded me deeply. Now I recognized it for what it was: the desperate lashing out of someone who'd built his identity on external validation and was now facing its loss. That evening, I pulled out my grandfather's letter again, reading it slowly, finding new meaning in his words. Show them who you truly are, not who they decided you were. The question remained, who was I, beyond the labels Maple Glen had assigned me, beyond even this unexpected inheritance? It was time to find out. 3 weeks after the revelation at the Brooks party, I found myself sitting in Walter Harlan's downtown office, surrounded by leather-bound law books and the gentle hum of air conditioning. We were reviewing the full extent of my inheritance, a process that revealed new surprises with each meeting. There's something else your grandfather wanted you to see, Walter said, sliding a weathered manila folder across his desk. He was very specific about the timing, only after you'd begun to understand the scope of the inheritance. I opened the folder to find old photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes. The top photo showed a much younger Gregory Brooks shaking hands with my grandfather in front of a construction site. Both men were smiling, though my grandfather's expression held a reservation that was clear even in the faded image. I don't understand, I said. Were they friends? Walter leaned back in his chair. Partners, briefly. Your grandfather financed Gregory's first real estate development through Sinclair Holdings. It was the project that launched Brooks Enterprises. I sorted through more photographs. Gregory and my grandfather at ribbon cuttings, business dinners, construction sites. In each successive image, my grandfather looked increasingly withdrawn, while Gregory appeared more confident. What happened between them? Walter sighed. That final project, the one that made Brooks Enterprises a major player, involved some ethical compromises your grandfather couldn't accept. Environmental shortcuts, worker safety issues, political favors. When he confronted Gregory, things turned ugly. I found a newspaper clipping from 25 years ago. Local developer buys out partner, expands downtown presence. The article mentioned Gregory Brooks purchasing his unnamed partner's stake in their joint venture. My grandfather sold his share? Under duress, Walter confirmed. Gregory threatened to expose certain irregularities in the project permitting process. Irregularities he himself had orchestrated but could pin on your grandfather. With your father's health already fragile and you just a child, your grandfather chose to step away quietly. I felt a cold anger building. He was blackmailed? Legally, I couldn't prove it. But yes, essentially. Gregory paid a fair price for your grandfather's share, but the company should have been half your family's all along. Brooks Enterprises was built on Sinclair investment, Sinclair land, and Sinclair connections. Did my father know this? Some of it. But your grandfather never told him the full story. He didn't want your father carrying that burden, especially with his heart condition. I continued sorting through the documents, piecing together a history I'd never suspected. My quiet grandfather and the Brooks family connected by business, betrayal, and a decades-long silence. At the bottom of the pile was an envelope addressed to me in my grandfather's handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Avery, the land and buildings are only symbols. The true wealth is in knowing who you are and standing firm in that knowledge. Gregory took what wasn't rightfully his, but in doing so, he lost something more valuable, his integrity. I've arranged things so you can choose justice without vengeance. Use this knowledge wisely. Remember that power exercised with compassion is the only power worth having. All my love, grandfather. I folded the letter carefully. Walter, I need to understand everything. Every property, every investment, every connection between Sinclair Holdings and Brooks Enterprises. Walter nodded approvingly. I've prepared a complete briefing. It will take several hours to go through. I have time, I said. We worked through lunch and into the afternoon, mapping out the complex web of assets and legal structures my grandfather had created. By the time we finished, I had a clear vision of both the inheritance and what I wanted to do with it. Walter, I'd like to schedule a meeting. Not just with Gregory Brooks, but with the entire board of Brooks Enterprises. His eyebrows lifted. That's unusual. The ground lease negotiation doesn't require board involvement. This isn't just about the lease anymore, I explained. It's about setting things right. For my grandfather, for my father, and for myself. The following Monday, I entered the imposing glass headquarters of Brooks Enterprises dressed in a tailored navy suit, the first clothing I'd purchased since learning of my inheritance. The receptionist, who had dismissed me during a previous visit when I'd delivered documents from my publishing house, now greeted me with deferential politeness. Ms. Sinclair, Mr. Brooks is expecting you in the boardroom. I was escorted to the top floor, where Walter Harlan waited outside heavy wooden doors. Are you ready? He asked. I nodded, smoothing my jacket. More than ready. The boardroom fell silent as we entered. 8 men and 2 women in expensive business attire sat around a massive table with Gregory at the head and Landon to his right. Their expressions ranged from curious to hostile. "Ms. Sinclair," Gregory began, his tone professionally cordial. "You requested this meeting. The board has agreed to hear you out, though I must say this is highly irregular." I took the empty chair at the opposite end of the table, Walter settling beside me. "Thank you for accommodating me," I said. "I'll be direct. I've spent the past weeks reviewing the history of Brooks Enterprises, particularly its founding and early growth." Gregory's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. Landon looked bored. "This company exists because of Sinclair Investment," I continued. "My grandfather provided the initial capital, the land, and many of the connections that made your early projects possible." "Ancient history," Gregory dismissed with a wave. "Your grandfather was bought out fairly. There are signed agreements." "Agreements signed under duress," I countered, with the threat of false accusations hanging over him. A murmur rippled through the board members. Gregory's face darkened. "That's a serious allegation, Mrs. Sinclair." "It is," I agreed, "and one I can substantiate. My grandfather kept meticulous records, including recordings of certain conversations. This was a calculated risk. There were no recordings that I knew of, but the flash of panic in Gregory's eyes told me my instinct was correct. "What exactly do you want?" he demanded, dropping all pretense of cordiality. I opened the folder I'd brought, sliding copies of a document across the table to each board member. "Equity, 25% of Brooks Enterprises, recognizing the founding contribution of Sinclair Holdings. In exchange, I'll extend all ground leases for 50 years at favorable rates and sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement regarding the irregular beginnings of this company." The boardroom erupted in overlapping voices. Landon stared at me with undisguised hatred. One of the female board members studied the documents with particular intensity before looking up at Gregory. "These allegations appear credible," she said. "As chief legal officer, I strongly advise we consider this offer." Gregory stood abruptly. "This is blackmail." "No," I replied calmly. "This is reconciliation. I'm not asking for control of your company. I'm not even asking for what might be legally mine if we litigated. The circumstances of my grandfather's buyout. I'm offering a path forward that acknowledges the past without destroying what you've built." The board members exchanged glances. Many had clearly never heard this version of the company's founding. "We need to discuss this privately," the chief legal officer stated. "Ms. Sinclair, would you mind stepping out while the board deliberates?" Walter and I waited in an adjacent conference room for nearly 2 hours. When we were finally called back, the atmosphere in the boardroom had shifted palpably. Gregory sat stiffly, his face a mask of controlled fury. Landon was noticeably absent. "The board has voted to accept your proposal in principle," the chief legal officer announced. "We'll need to work through the details, but we believe this resolution serves everyone's interests." I nodded, maintaining my composure despite the surge of vindication I felt. "I look forward to being a constructive partner in the company's future." As the meeting adjourned, Gregory remained seated while the others filed out. When we were alone, except for Walter, he finally spoke. "You've won this round, Avery. I underestimated you. I won't make that mistake again." There was threat in his words, but also a grudging respect. "This isn't about winning, Mr. Brooks," I replied. "It's about truth, about recognition. My grandfather never sought revenge against you, even knowing what you'd done. I'm honoring his approach." "Arthur was a fool," Gregory muttered. "Too principled for his own good." "Those principles are my inheritance too," I said, quietly. "And they're worth more than any property or company stake." As Walter and I left the Brooks Enterprises headquarters, I felt a weight lifting. Not just the burden of hidden history, but the accumulated weight of years spent feeling invisible and insignificant in my own community. "Your grandfather would be proud," Walter said as we stood in the sunshine outside the gleaming building. "You found justice without vengeance," just as he hoped. I looked up at the Brooks logo high above us, now partially mine. "This isn't the end, is it?" Walter smiled. "No, Ms. Sinclair. I rather think it's just the beginning." Summer faded into autumn, painting Maple Glen in fiery oranges and deep reds. The neighborhood had settled into a new normal, one where I was no longer invisible but recognized, with a complex mixture of respect, curiosity, and in some cases, trepidation. I continued working at my publishing house, despite my dramatically changed financial circumstances. The familiar rhythms of editing manuscripts and mentoring young writers grounded me amid the upheaval in other areas of my life. My colleagues knew something had changed. It was impossible to keep the Brooks Enterprises board seat entirely quiet, but I maintained the same dedicated work ethic I'd always shown. "You could buy this company now," my friend and fellow editor Lisa remarked over lunch one day. "Several times over, from what I hear." I smiled. "That's not the point of any of this." "Then what is?" she asked, genuinely curious. I considered the question carefully. "Recognition, I suppose? The chance to be seen as I truly am, not as others decided I should be." The ripples from my confrontation with the Brooks family extended throughout Maple Glen in unexpected ways. Victoria Brooks, previously the neighborhood's social queen, had withdrawn from community events. Rumors circulated that she and Gregory were having marital difficulties, exacerbated by the company's partial change in ownership. Landon was the most visibly affected. His swagger had diminished, replaced by a simmering resentment that manifested in small, petty ways. Parking his Tesla so it partially blocked my driveway, scheduling landscapers to work at dawn on Saturdays, accidentally having sprinklers activate when I walked past their property. I responded with pointed non-reaction, which only seemed to frustrate him further. At neighborhood gatherings, he made a show of ignoring me while simultaneously tracking my every movement. It would have been amusing if it weren't so transparent. The other neighbors adjusted to the new dynamic with varying degrees of grace. Mrs. Henderson became almost comically solicitous, bringing baked goods and invitations to social events I'd previously been excluded from. Mr. Peterson offered home repair advice unsolicited, and suddenly the neighborhood association wanted my input on community decisions. I accepted these overtures with politeness, but maintained a certain distance. Their sudden interest in my friendship felt as inauthentic as their previous dismissal. Only Mrs. Collins, an elderly widow who'd moved to Maple Glen around the same time my family had, approached me with genuine warmth. "I always knew there was something special about you, dear," she told me as we sat on her porch one evening. "You have your grandfather's quiet strength. Did you know him well?" I asked, surprised. She smiled mysteriously. "We had our moments. Arthur was a good man, principled in a way few are anymore." From Mrs. Collins, I learned stories about my grandfather that neither my father nor Walter Harlan had shared. How he'd quietly paid college tuition for the son of a groundskeeper who'd worked at one of his properties. How he'd forgiven mortgage payments for families struggling during economic downturns. How he'd refused to displace residents when developing new properties, even when it would have been more profitable. He believed wealth carried responsibility. Mrs. Collins explained, "Not just to grow more wealth, but to improve lives around you." Her words stayed with me as I navigated my new position on the Brooks Enterprises board. The quarterly meetings were exercises in careful diplomacy. Gregory maintained a cold professionalism, while other board members gradually warmed to my perspective, particularly when I advocated for more sustainable building practices and community-oriented developments. "These initiatives will cut into our profit margins," Gregory objected during one particularly tense meeting. "Initially," I conceded, "but they'll build community goodwill and attract a demographic willing to pay premium prices for sustainable living spaces. It's good ethics and good business." To my surprise, several board members sided with me, including the chief legal officer, Patricia Winters, who had become something of an ally. "Brooks Enterprises has focused exclusively on maximum short-term profit for too long," she remarked after the meeting. "Your perspective is refreshing." Meanwhile, I began exploring ways to use my inheritance beyond the Brooks Enterprises stake. I established a scholarship fund for local students pursuing careers in sustainable development. I invested in affordable housing initiatives in neighborhoods adjacent to Maple Glen. I funded arts programs at the community center where my mother had once volunteered. These decisions weren't about publicity. I avoided having my name attached to the initiatives whenever possible. They were about honoring my grandfather's philosophy that wealth should serve community, not just accumulate for its own sake. One crisp October evening, I returned home to find Landon sitting on my front steps. He looked disheveled, his usual polish absent. "We need to talk," he said as I approached. I hesitated, then unlocked my door. "Come in." He followed me inside, declining my offer of tea or coffee. We sat in my modest living room, the silence stretching uncomfortably. "My father is pushing me out," he finally said, his voice hollow. "Says I'm not board material after that scene I caused last meeting." I recalled the incident. Landon had vehemently opposed my proposal for worker housing near one of our new developments, eventually shouting and storming out when the vote didn't go his way. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, meaning it. Despite everything, There was something pitiful about watching Landon's carefully constructed identity crumble. "Are you?" he challenged. "Isn't this exactly what you wanted? To see us fall?" I shook my head. "That was never my goal, Landon. I only wanted recognition of my family's contribution and a chance to influence the company's direction." He laughed bitterly. "Well, you've succeeded brilliantly. The board respects you. My father resents but fears you. My mother is talking about divorce. And He gestured vaguely at himself. "Whatever this is. What do you want from me?" I asked directly. He met my eyes for perhaps the first time without artifice or agenda. "I don't know. To understand, maybe, how you went from being invisible to being this, how you stay so calm when you should be gloating." "Gloating wouldn't serve any purpose," I replied. "And as for the change, it wasn't me who changed, Landon. It was everyone's perception." He considered this. "Maybe. Or maybe having power revealed something in you that was hidden before. The same could be true for you," I suggested gently. "Perhaps losing some power might reveal aspects of yourself worth knowing." He flinched, but didn't argue. After another long silence, he stood to leave. At the door, he paused. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For how I treated you growing up. For a lot of things." The apology was awkward, imperfect, possibly self-serving, but also, I sensed, genuine in its way. "Thank you for saying that," I acknowledged. After he left, I sat alone in my quiet house, reflecting on how thoroughly my life had transformed in just a few months. The inheritance had changed my circumstances dramatically, but the most profound changes were internal. A newfound confidence, a clearer sense of purpose, a freedom from the weight of others' judgments. My phone rang, breaking my reverie. It was Walter Harlan. "Ms. Sinclair, I have some concerning news. One of our investigators has discovered unusual activity in the Brooks Enterprises financial records. I believe Gregory may be attempting to undermine your position through some rather creative accounting." I sighed, unsurprised yet disappointed. "I'll come to your office first thing tomorrow." The battle for Brooks Enterprises and for my place in Maple Glen wasn't over yet. The financial irregularities Walter Harlan's team uncovered were sophisticated and deliberate, a complex scheme to devalue certain Brooks Enterprises holdings before transferring them to a subsidiary company where I held no ownership stake. If successful, Gregory would effectively siphon millions in assets away from the parent company, diluting the value of my shares while enriching himself and loyal board members. "It's clever," Patricia Winters admitted when I privately shared the findings with her. As chief legal officer, her perspective was crucial. Technically legal in structure, but clearly deceptive in intent. The board would have approved these transfers without understanding their true purpose. We sat in her corner office overlooking the city, autumn rain streaking the floor-to-ceiling windows. Patricia had invited me there rather than meeting. At Walter's office, a sign of her growing independence from Gregory's influence. "What are my options?" I asked. She tapped her pen thoughtfully against her legal pad. "We could bring this directly to the board, but Gregory would claim business necessity and likely have enough allies to push it through anyway. Or," she hesitated, "or what? Or we could gather more comprehensive evidence and take it to the SEC. Some aspects of this scheme potentially cross into securities fraud territory." I considered this, remembering my grandfather's words. "Power exercised with compassion is the only power worth having." "I'd prefer to avoid involving federal regulators if possible," I said finally. "This company employs hundreds of people. A securities investigation would harm many who had nothing to do with Gregory's actions." Patricia studied me curiously. "You continue to surprise me, Avery. Most people in your position would want revenge." "This isn't about revenge," I replied. "It never has been." We developed a third approach, a carefully documented presentation for the next board meeting revealing the scheme without exposing the company to external investigation. Patricia would present the legal concerns while I would offer an alternative restructuring plan that would protect all shareholders' interests equally. The week before the critical board meeting, I received an unexpected visitor at my home. Victoria Brooks stood on my doorstep in the fading evening light, her usual perfect appearance slightly diminished by visible exhaustion. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice lacking its customary confidence. I showed her to the living room, offering tea, which she accepted with a distracted nod. "I know about Gregory's financial maneuvers," she said without preamble, "and I know you're planning to confront him at the board meeting." I kept my expression neutral. "How did you learn this?" A small bitter smile curved her lips. 28 years of marriage teaches you to recognize patterns. Gregory always becomes particularly attentive when he's hiding something significant. I had our home office swept for documents. She sipped her tea. Also, Landon told me you two had spoken. He's changing, reflecting. It's unexpected. I waited, sensing she had more to say. I'm filing for divorce, she continued. Gregory doesn't know yet. The papers will be served. Tomorrow. I'm sorry, I offered, genuinely meaning it. Victoria shook her head. Don't be. This marriage has been a business arrangement for years. What I came to tell you is that I own 7% of Brooks Enterprises through my family trust, shares that Gregory believes will always support his position. She met my eyes directly. I'm prepared to align my votes with yours at the board meeting. With Victoria's shares, Patricia's support, and my own 25%, we would have enough to block Gregory's scheme. It was a turning point I hadn't anticipated. Why? I asked simply. Victoria set down her teacup carefully. Because you remind me of someone I used to be, before I decided status and security were worth sacrificing my principles. Because Gregory has built his empire by diminishing others, including me. And because, her voice softened slightly, your grandfather once showed me a kindness Gregory never knew about, when Landon was an infant and I was at my lowest point. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. Some secrets deserved to remain private. The board meeting the following week unfolded like a carefully choreographed drama. Gregory presented his asset transfer proposal with confident authority, each slide of his presentation polished to disguise the true impact of the transactions. When he finished, Patricia requested the floor. With clinical precision, she dismantled the proposal, revealing its true purpose and potential legal vulnerabilities. Gregory's face flushed with anger, then drained to ashen as he realized the extent of her preparation. This is outrageous, he sputtered. These accusations are fully documented, I interjected calmly, distributing copies of my alternative restructuring plan. As is this proposal, which accomplishes the stated business objectives without disadvantaging any shareholder group. Gregory's eyes darted around the table, assessing where each board member's loyalty might lie. When Victoria spoke in favor of my proposal. The shock on his face was momentarily unguarded. Victoria, we should discuss this privately before. I've reviewed both proposals thoroughly, she interrupted coolly. As a significant shareholder, I find Ms. Sinclair's approach more equitable and legally sound. The vote was 8-3 in favor of my plan. Gregory sat immobile as his careful scheme collapsed, his knuckles white against the polished mahogany table. As the meeting adjourned, board members filed out with murmured congratulations to me. Gregory remained seated, Victoria standing deliberately apart from him. When only the three of us remained, I closed the boardroom door. Why not expose me completely? Gregory asked, his voice rough. You had enough to destroy me, to force me. Out! Because destruction isn't the point, I replied. Reform is. Brooks Enterprises can be both profitable and ethical. Those aren't mutually exclusive goals. He laughed harshly. You sound just like your grandfather. Arthur always believed business could be some noble pursuit. He was right, I said simply. And deep down, you know it. That's why you've gone to such lengths to silence that knowledge. Because facing it would mean acknowledging how far you've strayed from your own principles. Gregory stared at me, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. You think you understand me, Avery? You don't know the first thing about what it takes to build something like this. I know it doesn't have to involve betrayal and manipulation, I countered. My grandfather built something significant without compromising his integrity. So can you, if you choose to. Victoria moved toward the door. I'll leave you two to finish this conversation. Avery, thank you for your candor today. With quiet dignity, she exited, leaving Gregory and me in charged silence. What happens now? He finally asked. That depends on you, I said. We can continue as adversaries, wasting energy on corporate warfare that benefits neither of us. Or we can find a way forward that honors both the Brooks and Sinclair legacies. Gregory studied me for a long moment. You really aren't motivated by revenge, are you? No. I'm motivated by justice, by truth, by the belief that things can be better than they've been. He nodded slowly, a gesture neither of agreement nor disagreement, but of acknowledgement. I'll consider your words. As I left the Brooks Enterprises headquarters that afternoon, I realized something fundamental had shifted, not just in the power dynamics of the company or in my standing within Maple Glen, but in my understanding of my own capacity to effect change without sacrificing my principles. My grandfather had given me more than property and shares. He'd given me his example, his philosophy, his quiet strength. And in honoring those gifts, I'd finally found my own voice. Spring returned to Maple Glen, bringing renewal in more ways than one. The neighborhood had undergone subtle but significant changes over the months since my inheritance had altered its social landscape. The Brooks mansion stood quieter now. Victoria had moved to an elegant townhouse downtown after finalizing her divorce from Gregory. He remained in the family home, but neighbors noted he spent more time there, less at the office. A shift in priorities prompted by both professional reckonings and personal losses. Landon had surprised everyone by taking a position with a nonprofit focused on affordable housing, one of the initiatives I'd quietly funded. When I ran into him at a community meeting, his transformation was evident not just in his more casual attire, but in the thoughtful way he engaged with residents from less affluent neighborhoods adjacent to Maple Glen. "This work suits you," I observed as we walked to the parking lot afterward. He smiled. Not the practiced, perfect smile of the golden boy, but something more genuine. "It's strange. I feel more accomplished helping a family secure stable housing than I ever did closing multi-million-dollar commercial deals." "Your grandfather would approve," I said. "He believed business should improve lives, not just generate profits." Landon looked surprised. "You've spoken with my father?" "Occasionally. We're still finding our balance as business associates." This was an understatement. My relationship with Gregory Brooks had evolved into something complex. Not friendship, certainly, but a wary mutual respect. After the board confrontation, he had gradually shifted his approach to leadership, becoming more transparent and ethical in his business practices. Whether this change stemmed from genuine reflection or pragmatic recognition of altered power dynamics remained unclear, but the results benefited everyone involved with Brooks Enterprises. At a board meeting the previous week, he had even acknowledged my contribution publicly. "Mrs. Sinclair's perspective has been valuable," he admitted, the words clearly difficult but sincere. "Our community-focused developments are outperforming projections." My own life had found a new rhythm. I'd finally left my position at the publishing house, but not to focus on Brooks Enterprises. Instead, I'd established a small foundation dedicated to neighborhood revitalization and arts education, working from a renovated storefront in a transitional area between Maple Glen and the city's more economically challenged neighborhoods. The Sinclair Foundation became my passion, a way to honor my grandfather's values while creating something uniquely mine. We funded local artists, supported small business development, and created scholarship programs for promising students. The work brought me into contact with a diverse community I'd never fully engaged with while living in Maple Glen's insular bubble. One such connection had proven especially meaningful. Michael Delgado, an architect specializing in sustainable urban renewal, had approached the foundation with an innovative proposal for converting abandoned industrial spaces into mixed-income housing and community centers. His vision, talent, and genuine commitment to improving lives resonated deeply with me. What began as professional collaboration evolved naturally into friendship and eventually something more. Michael saw me, truly saw me, in a way no one in Maple Glen ever had, not as the quiet failure nor as the surprise heiress, but simply as Avery. On this particular spring morning, I stood in my front yard planting flowers, simple marigolds and petunias that would brighten the modest landscaping. Mrs. Henderson stopped while walking her dog. "Good morning, Avery. The house is looking lovely." "Thank you," I replied, wiping soil from my hands. She hesitated, then added, "The neighborhood association is meeting next week to discuss the summer festival. We'd love your input." I smiled, recognizing her invitation as genuine rather than strategic. "I'll try to make it." As she continued her walk, I returned to my planting, reflecting on how profoundly relationships in Maple Glen had shifted. Neighbors who had once dismissed me now sought my opinion. Those who had whispered about the Sinclair girl now spoke of my foundation's work with approval. The transformation wasn't about wealth or power, but about being truly seen for who I was. Michael arrived that afternoon, helping me complete the garden before we headed to the Sinclair Foundation offices for a meeting. As we drove through Maple Glen, I noticed Gregory Brooks in his driveway, washing his car himself, something he would have previously delegated to household staff. He nodded as we passed, a simple acknowledgement between neighbors with complicated history. I returned the gesture, finding unexpected peace in the exchange. "That's Gregory Brooks, isn't it?" Michael asked. "You've told me so much about him, I feel like I should dislike him on principle." I laughed. softly. It's more complicated than that now. People can change, not completely perhaps, but meaningfully. Including you? He asked with gentle perception. Especially me, I admitted, though not in the ways others might think. The money, the properties, the company shares, none of that changed who I am. But being recognized, being valued, being seen, that changed how I see myself. Later, that evening, after our foundation meeting, Michael and I walked through the neighborhood park, where I'd spent countless solitary hours as a child, watching other families enjoy the spaces where I'd never quite belonged. I have something to show you, I said, leading him to a secluded corner where a newly installed bench overlooked the pond. A small bronze plaque gleamed on its backrest, in memory of Arthur Sinclair, who saw the potential in every person and place. Your grandfather? Michael asked. I nodded, emotion tightening my throat. The foundation dedicated it last week. This was his favorite spot in the park. He used to bring me here when I was little, telling me stories about the land, about its history, about its future. Michael squeezed my hand. He would be proud of you, Avery. Not because of what you've acquired, but because of what you've built. We sat together as twilight settled over Maple Glen, transforming the familiar landscape into something softer, more forgiving. Neighborhood children played near the pond's edge, their laughter carrying across the water. Among them was Mrs. Peterson's granddaughter, who waved enthusiastically when she spotted me. Miss Avery? Are you coming to our school play next week? I'm playing the lead. I wouldn't miss it, I called back, smiling. This perhaps was the most profound change of all, becoming not just visible but welcomed, not just acknowledged but embraced by the community that had once looked through me. As darkness fell and lights began twinkling in homes throughout Maple Glen, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The revelation at Landon's graduation party had been just the beginning. The true transformation had come through the choices I'd made afterward, choosing dignity over vengeance, principle over power, community over isolation. Michael and I walked back toward my house, the same modest colonial I'd grown up in, which I'd chosen to keep despite having the means to move elsewhere. Its simplicity reminded me daily of where I'd come from, of my parents' quiet determination, of my grandfather's wisdom. You know, Michael said as we reached the front porch, most people who suddenly come into wealth or power use it to distance themselves from their past. You've done the opposite. You've used it to heal your relationship with your past. His observation struck me as profoundly true. I hadn't erased the years of being overlooked and underestimated. I'd incorporated them into a more complete understanding of myself and my place in the world. The neighbors used to call me the failure, I told him, watching understanding dawn in his kind eyes. Now they call me the foundation director, or the Brooks Enterprises board member, or simply Avery. But the truth is, I'm all of those people. The quiet girl who never quite fit in, the unexpected heiress who changed the neighborhood's power dynamics, and the woman who's trying to build something meaningful from both experiences. That's why I love you, Michael said simply. Your ability to find meaning in both struggle and success. The words hung in the evening air between us. The first time either of us had spoken of love. Instead of anxiety or uncertainty, I felt a deep, settled rightness, as if my grandfather had arranged this too, this final piece of belonging. As we stood on the porch of my childhood home, with Maple Glen spread around us like a familiar book whose pages I could now read clearly, I understood the full circle of my journey. The neighborhood that had once defined me by my invisibility had become the canvas on which I was painting a new definition, not through revenge or displays of wealth, but through purpose, integrity, and the quiet strength my grandfather had always seen in me. The world may try to define you, I murmured, recalling words that had guided me through this transformation. But only you can decide who you truly are. And at last, in this place where I had once felt so lost I knew exactly who that was.